Hey, you are listening to the Victims and Villains podcast, a podcast that is dedicated to educating and engaging individuals like yourselves on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. And on this episode, we're asking if you really want to taste it because we're talking about not one, not two, but 8 episodes, the full thing of James Gunn's Peacemaker HBO series. I'm your host. I'm your co-host, Captain Nostalgia, and I'm joined by fellow staff writer and co-host of the You Have to Watch This podcast, Mr. Alan Cramp. What's going on, man?
Pleasure to be here.
Yo, I'm so excited about this. Let me just say, this show has pleasantly surprised me.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a while ago back when we covered DC fandom. I think I was a little bit more excited for this than you were. Because I had bought merch before the show even came out for the show, which I'm wearing now. It's my it's Peacemaker shirt, which has like the cartoon Peacemaker with the helmet on. Yeah, I've been excited since they announced this show. So
I was excited the fact that it was James Gunn because he's one of my favorite filmmakers, and the Suicide Squad absolutely blew my socks off. It was one of the best superhero movies we've seen in a long time. The fact that it's not superheroes. But John Cena as an actor, I hadn't seen enough prior to this show to actually say I had a faith in him to carry an 8-episode arc.
I had seen him in some films. I was like, this guy needs his own thing. He was in the Amy Schumer film Trainwreck. It's like, this guy's got comedy chops. Like, I can see him, like, he needs like a superhero franchise because he's got the build for it. He's got the personality. He was also in the Tina Fey and Amy Poehler film Sisters as like a security guard. It's like, yeah, this guy needs something. Like, he needs, like, someone's going to find something for him to do that's in this genre. And it's Peacemaker. Like, Peacemaker, James Gunn and John Cena working together absolutely is the great combo that makes this character work. Because I don't think if you had any other actor in that role or another filmmaker behind the scenes, I don't know if this character would necessarily work as well as it does. And I think the fact that the show was born of James Gunn wanting to work with John Cena more really impacts the show as well, because you have that, like, it was built for him. I don't really have much negative to say about Peacemaker.
Well, I'm gonna show my cards up front. This is a near perfect show, in my opinion. I think this is one of the best things that DC has ever put their minds to, and the fact that they like had enough faith in James Gunn to say, "Hey, it's going to be," because this show is still weird in the same vein that the Suicide Squad was, and quirky in that way. And I think that having that faith really allowed them to create something that was not only funny, but also deep and also action packed, which I feel like, and I don't know where you stand on this, we're kind of in this like new phase of like the superhero fandom where we're starting to see now a different media with things like higher budget streaming services doing their take on it. Marvel obviously unleashed WandaVision, Hawkeye, What If, Loki, and Winter Soldier and Falcon, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier last year. And while those shows were good, I never felt like they were truly great the way that Peacemaker is.
I have trouble saying this is the best thing that DC has done.
I'm saying it's the best. I'm saying it's the best that they've done in a long time.
Even that I can't agree with. I think Doom Patrol, especially the first 2 seasons.
Okay, fair enough.
That's HBO. I think the best thing that for DC that I can get behind is HBO Max. I think they're able to tell these stories that they couldn't tell in the CW, or they don't want to tell in movies because they wanted to go long format. And I think HBO Max is a great outlet for that, because and like something like Peacemaker works really well for that setup. Whereas like Titans, where you have I'm allowed to swear, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like on Titans, like you have Robin saying "fuck Batman" in the first episode just because you can. Like it doesn't really make sense for those characters to be hard R and like adult necessarily, but Doom Patrol it makes sense. Peacemaker it absolutely makes sense. I think HBO Max has allowed DC to step outside of themselves. Like, okay, we have the Flash, we have Legends of Tomorrow, we have all this stuff on the CW. That's like the family oriented superhero stuff. Uh, we're gonna do some stuff on HBO Max that we're gonna push the boundaries of DC Comics, and we're gonna explore these characters that you might not know. We're gonna tell stories that you might not have seen anywhere else. Like, um, there's elements in Peacemaker that you wouldn't see on network television, even today. And that's not even talking about the language or the gore of the show. It's just storylines that they were telling you can't really get away with on the CW. But I think this is probably one of the strongest things that they've done recently. I don't know if it's the best in a while. Like I still put Doom Patrol up there almost on the same tier as this. Like they're very
That's
close. I enjoyed them both.
that's fair. I was partial out of the like DC universe shows. I was always partial to Harley Quinn. I feel like her show to me was always my favorite, and it's the one I've gone back and rewatched the most. Um, but on that note, I think you're right. I think that HBO Max is the best thing that could have happened for DC, and I feel like the whole like the infamous F Batman line of Titans, like they have definitely kind of fleshed that out and given some more context to that. It's not been the best show that DC has done. Um,
It it's one of those shows that I end up watching the whole season of, and like halfway through the season, like, okay, I'm digging this, and then by the finale, they lose me completely. Like, why did I watch all this? But
I'm right there with you.
I didn't have that with Peacemaker at all. Every episode, I was like, I wanted to see more. Like, even if the finale, I was like, give me season 2. Like, let's get into it. Like, come on.
And I feel like the reason why this works so well is partially because of Cena. And you said it earlier, like I can't picture anyone else in this role but John Cena. Like John Cena is Peacemaker the way that, it's hard for people to separate Hugh Jackman from Wolverine or RDJ from Iron Man. Like those are those characters. And, you can't convince me otherwise that, and I think it'll be a very long time before we see another Iron Man, or maybe I say that after the Doctor Strange rumors, but that's another podcast that Alan will be
Yeah,
doing soon.
yeah.
But Wolverine's another great example. Is like I can't see anyone else but Peacemaker being John Cena, and largely because there's so much heart that he brings to the character, and the improvisation that we'll talk about at some point in this episode is just spot on, so incredible.
And I think a part of that is for the live action medium, it's a new character. Like we've never seen a live action Peacemaker before, as far as I know. He probably showed up in like the background of Arrow or something. Uh, and I didn't
No,
realize that.
honestly, he's a pretty obscure character.
Yeah,
Like I got through like halfway through the season. I was like, I want to start checking out some of these comics, and he has like one like tiny trade paperback of like his appearances. And I think they've done 2 miniseries on the character, so he's not even really a well-known character. I mean, he's like D-list style character that Gunn really brought to the main forefront.
yeah. And I mean, he came from the Suicide Squad comics, so and he appeared in.
He was originally a Charlton Comics character that appeared for a while, and Garth Ennis actually did a book earlier this year on him called "Disturbing the Peace."
Yeah,
So
I mean, I think the biggest contribution that Peacemaker had before to pop culture before his show was to Watchmen, because the comedian in Watchmen was inspired by Peacemaker.
Interesting, really.
Yeah, I had heard that before, but I'm reading it on Wikipedia, so don't quote me on that. But he's also part of the Kingdom Come storyline. Yeah, I'm just checking to see if he was in anything else. He was in the Scribblenauts Unmasked, a DC Comics adventure video game, and
Weird
uh
flex.
yeah, and evidently an emo in Fortnite. Oh no, he was a little thing in Fortnite that I have, but he hasn't shown up as a skin yet. So
Interesting. So I think we're both on the same page with the series. I think that is it's a great show. And I think,
yeah, and John Cena is great in it, but I also think that he has a great supporting cast as well. Like we talked a lot about John Cena
oh,
at the top, but I think the supporting cast here is phenomenal just as much.
I like so I'll throw my cards up front early in the episode. Cena, as much as I love him in this show, he is not my favorite character in this show. It is Freddie Stroma, who plays Adrian Chase slash Vigilante. Arrow previously did Vigilante,
Mm,
and they kind of muffled it up about probably like halfway through the season, and went another route entirely with it. But I think that like Stroma just kind of gives us a completely different take on that character. And I'm wondering if you actually know the story behind Vigilante and kind of how he got integrated into the cast.
I know that there was a casting issue and they had to recast during production.
So there actually was a guy, and I don't remember his name. If you want to find it real quick.
Sure.
But essentially, the way that it worked was James Gunn has a no a-hole policy, basically meaning like he wants to create the least toxic work environments possible. And with that, there are some rumors that the original actor that played Vigilante quit for one of two reasons. One, that he couldn't commit to the long term vision for the character, and two, which is and it might be a mixture of both, but apparently like he was just kind of a dick on the set, and so what ended up happening was Gunn got a hold of Elizabeth Banks and asked about Freddie Stroma. And because the two had previously worked together on Pitch Perfect back in 2012. And he asked him about her, can you kind of tell me a little bit more about this guy as a character? Like, how is his like, uh, you know, ethics? Is he a cool guy? Is he a dick? Is he an a-hole? And she spoke very highly of him, and it's actually because of her that he actually ended up finalizing and kind of coming into this role.
Yeah. So the actor who was cast as Vigilante before was Chris Conrad. And I'm looking at his IMDb. There's not really much I recognize him from. But I think Freddie Stroma, the first few episodes are weird because you can tell they had to go back and reshoot stuff. So he's in the mask a lot. But I think he's best when he's not in the mask. Like when he has the mask off and he's just in the costume without the mask, or just is Adrian Chase. I think that's when he's the best. Like early on, like the vigilante stuff just felt weird because you could tell it wasn't him acting it. It was somebody else under the mask, and like that works occasionally in like the Mandalorian or Boba Fett, but it didn't really work in this for me.
So I didn't even like really like notice that. So like that to me like didn't have like a real big effect on it. But I do like in context, like I see what you're referring to and like
Yeah.
talking about. And it is like as the show progresses, like you can definitely see that there is some like awkward tension towards the beginning of their like the series with their relationship. But as the series goes on, like him and Cena just had like incredible chemistry. I just loved their back and forth. we talked about it. I'm very vocal that like one of my favorite comedy movies of all time is Step Brothers, and Step Brothers works so well is because of the chemistry and the back and forth rhetoric you have between John C. Riley and Will Ferrell. And to me, these two characters almost kind of feel like a different, like more masculine version of those characters. And I think that one of the scenes in the finale where they blow up that car and just their reaction to it is kind of like something I could see Brendan and Dale doing.
Do we just become best friends? Yep. Yeah. And I can totally see them at the Catalina wine mixer as well. So
Yeah, they opening band right there.
So before we get into spoilers and stuff, I've got a question for you.
Sure.
Is this the best piece of media to come out of the COVID lockdowns? In your opinion?
Oh, man,
because the whole origin of this is
thing.
Once everyone went into lockdown in 2020, James Gunn was like, I'm going to sit down and write a script for this Peacemaker show. And he wrote all of the episodes in lockdown and got the show greenlit. And then once things started opening back up, they went right into production.
That I did not actually know.
Yeah,
but
he wrote the entire first season in 8 weeks during lockdown, out of boredom.
Dang. I will say, yeah. I honestly think that this is probably the best lockdown we've seen, outside of probably 2020's Host. And I only say that as a horror fan, but I think that this, like, if I'm going to show anyone what you're capable of doing within the lockdown structure, it's definitely this show. Because I feel like this show has something for everyone, and it also has a lot of depth that I felt like really caught me off guard.
Yeah, and I think there'll be a time when, like 10 years from now, when we look back at this time in pop culture and like see things that were born of the COVID lockdowns and like things that were written in it that don't have to deal with it, and then things that do have to deal with it head on. Like I think one of the best things I've seen come out of the lockdowns was the show Staged with David Tennant and Michael Sheen, which you've not seen any clips of. I highly recommend. If you like either of those actors, I highly recommend that. I think the first 2 seasons are on Hulu, and they're doing a 3rd season. It's just them on Zoom calls, like yelling at each other, and it's phenomenal. But it's going to be weird. Like in a few years, we're going to be able to look back and see, like, okay, we were all locked in our houses for this amount of time, but look at all the great art that came out of that. Like whether it's just a screen, like you're going to be hearing about, oh yeah, I started the screenplay during COVID lockdowns. You're going to be hearing that story for years. And I think this is one of the first big examples of that, at least one of the biggest budget examples of that.
That too, I think that speaks a lot of volume to like Gunn as a creator, that like, and specifically about these characters, is that, you know, obviously there was a lot of dispute when the news broke that like Marvel essentially canceled him because of previous things that he had done or said, and DC was like, you know, we'll take him. And he wanted to jump into these, you know, really obscure characters. And the fact that like there was something about this Peacemaker, you know, Christopher Smith, John Cena character that kind of blew up into this series, and not just for one season, but for more. And because it has been greenlit for a second season, and my hesitation for the second season was it has to have the same love and care. Like it wouldn't be the same if James Gunn didn't write these episodes. And the fact that, you know, is now come out after he wraps on Guardians, his next big career move is to basically focus in on DC television. And that to me gives me a lot of hope and a lot of optimism.
Yeah, I mean, I'm of the mind that Marvel did not fire him. It was Disney, and I don't think Kevin Feige really had a call in that. But I'm glad that he's able to finish out his trilogy of Guardians movies. I'm excited to see what he does with DC television moving forward. He's also got a screenplay for Warner Brothers that John Cena, I think, is going to be starring in. It's
Oh, the
Wile E. Coyote movie.
yeah, versus Acme.
Yeah. Um, so I'm curious to see how that plays out for him. Um, but yeah, I'm excited to see like what intrigues me about the DC stuff right now is like we're kind of in the wild west of DC. Like until the Flash movie comes out, like there's a lot of things that aren't really like we don't know who Batman is in the DC EU at this point. There's a lot of things up in the air, and I think moving forward, it'll be interesting to see how they connect things and where they go because they haven't really set out like okay, here's our plan for the next 3 years like Marvel does. Like it's like okay, here's what's coming out this year. Here's a little sizzle reel for everything. Get excited because Michael Keaton's coming back as Batman. But we also have Robert Pattinson's Batman. So it's like a whole mess. And I think on DC television side, they're like, yeah, let's just do whatever. Like they did things in this show that I don't think they could get away with in mainstream. Like if they made some of the references in this that they made, if they made some of the references from this show in the Suicide Squad movie, I don't think it would have been they wouldn't have gone over as well as they did in the show.
No, and I mean some of these jokes are like earned.
Yeah.
And they are paid off, and we'll talk about them as spoilers. But not to kind of conspirize, and if this goes down a weird rabbit hole, I'm super sorry, listeners. But Matt Reeves, since we're now in a time of the Batman press, Matt Reeves said that the Batman 2 is actually going to be connecting to the larger DC universe plan moving forward, which I am kind of curious about because there are rumors that the Flash is supposed to be resetting it, and I'm guessing that the Batgirl is going to take place within the Batman 89 universe, but I don't know. It's kind of the Wild West, as you said.
Yeah, it's a mess. Like that might be the case, but at the same time, J.K. Simmons is coming back as Commissioner Gordon, so who knows?
It's weird. Yeah. So I'm just going to enter into spoiler territory, and I'm going to stick on so this is your official spoiler warning right here. And I'm going to just to jump into what Peacemaker means for the DCEU, because the DCEU, this Peacemaker show is supposedly takes place after the events of the Flash. I don't know if you knew that or not.
I did know that. Josh, we've met. You know me. I knew that.
Sure.
I don't know if I believe it, but I did.
Yeah, it is weird to hear that, and I'm also curious to kind of know what this means for the future of the DCU, because you talked about earlier just a few minutes ago about how like there are some references to the larger DC continuity that you don't feel like would fly, and one of them is like this is the existence of Batmite. It is in here.
Yeah,
Green
that's
Arrow.
The one I was talking about.
Green Arrow has now been confirmed to be in here. Superman has a butt fetish. Like there's someone, but I think obviously the most one that is woven throughout the entire show is the Aquaman fish rumor. And I read something online that is like, I have to say that James Gunn is brilliant for writing 8 episodes only to make an Aquaman F's fish joke. That's the only reason the Peacemaker exists.
I don't think that's the only reason. If it was, kudos to him. It makes me really excited to see what his setup is for Guardians 3. What joke we're gonna end that on. But no, yeah, like it expands the DC universe, like the DC extended universe, in a way that they haven't really been able to do with many other things. Like you had Shazam reference Batman and Superman, but it didn't really expand anything that we didn't already see. Here you're getting references to characters like a bunch of Batman's villains, Batmite, the Green Arrow, like you said. Like there, it's just, you don't have to see these characters. You can kind of assume already that these characters are out there. in this world, because eventually we're going to get to see some of them. God, I hope we get to see Batmite. But like, I enjoyed it. I wasn't surprised by those references though, because I just always assumed those characters existed and we just hadn't seen them yet.
Right. I am now curious too, so I'm looking up Doll Man is another one that is referenced in here. Super obscure. So this is
don't they mention
Go
Kite
ahead.
Man too?
They do mention Kite Man. So this is an article written by Cole Abnider from comicbookresource.com. And it's the Ten-Eyed Man, and he is referenced in here. Peacemaker could mention how this is we get referenced in season 2. Sorry. Yeah, and another one here, but the 4th episode references one of the more bizarre ones that I'd never heard of until this episode came out, and it was the Chode Less Traveled mentions the character of Matter Eater Lad, who it's super weird. Just reading this comicbook.com article from Jenner Anderson. This is just a brief description about his history. Created by Joel Siegel and John Forte, 1962's Adventure Comics number 303. Tenzio and Cam / Man-Eater Lad is a costume character who, as the name suggests, has the ability to eat all matter, something he inherited from his home planet. Matter Eater Lad then serves as a member of the Legion of Superheroes, which again references just that opens up a whole can of opportunities for DC, who admittedly is also sporadically used and is often used with the weirder annals of DC lore. Yeah,
I mean, it's great when you have somebody who's a fan of the obscure to pull in the weird references. You got to remember, the Suicide Squad had Polka Dot Man as one of the main characters.
Yeah, I was just about to say him.
So, I'm surprised.
Do you think that?
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was gonna say, do you think that now, like, this changes the dynamics of what we can see within the lores of DC?
I mean, I don't think it's. I don't know, because like I think it's one thing for DC to make references to characters like Matter Eating Lad and Batmite, but it's another thing to show them. Like unless you're doing it in like one-offs like Peacemaker, like for like an episode, I don't really see them playing like a big role in anything cinematic. I think a lot of them are probably just references to be references.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
There's a part of me where like there's a scene in the series where like they're all, I think it's in the finale, where they're all kind of talking about all the crazy things that Peacemaker says specifically about some of the DC heroes, and how he's full of crap, and Vigilante's like, no, I can't confirm this Green Arrow rumor is real. I'm almost kind of curious if like that's kind of like their write-off for like, yes, these things exist within the greater DC universe, but not in the way that Peacemaker sees them.
I mean, that's probably a good argument too. Like, I don't think anything that, like, I don't really think Superman's really has a butt fetish. Like, I don't think that that's a thing that really exists. I mean, maybe, I don't know what happens in Smallville stays in Smallville. But like, I think it's like a twisted view from a character who kind of sees what he wants to see in people up until this point in the show. Like, but I was going to say, before we got into all that, like, we've gone almost half an hour now and we haven't talked about the opening credits.
Before we get to those, we just bet one thing less real quick. Yeah. I'm gonna sample in here the his Batman monologue from one of the earlier episodes, and just his view on Batman. So I'm gonna, for editing purposes, gonna go. But yeah, as we were talking about the opening credits, like, I was dumbfounded the first time I watched this show, and like, I feel like typically, like, when I watch TV, like South Park is kind of the one thing I've been going through the last year or so. And every time HBO Max is like skip intro, I'm like, click. And this is like the first time that I'm like, nope, you got to watch it. Every freaking second of it. I have to ask, do you know how to do this dance yet?
I mean, give me an hour, I could probably do a horrible version of it, but I'm not a great dancer.
Me neither.
But yeah, so I think I definitely saw the opening credits before I saw the show. I was like, okay, if this is the vibe they're going for the opening credits, I'm all in. Because it's like, John Cena can't dance, and it's so obvious, but it's so much fun. Like, he's giving it his all. The rest of the cast is doing a great job with it. It's a catchy song. Like, I have that on my phone now, that I'll just, like, whenever it comes on, I just blare it in my car.
It is my alarm that I wake up to in the morning.
But I agree. So I agree with you. Like, this is one of the ones I don't skip. And like, there was a moment in the show where I think you were meant to skip it. Like, if you skipped it, you miss out on like a dramatic beat, because like, as fun as the intro is, there's one episode where it's just like, it hits you like a Mack truck after the cold open. And that's the episode. We're in spoilers now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We're the episode after, like, one episode, I think it's the second to last episode of the season, opens with his brother dying and like him remembering all of that. And it's like him looking into the mirror, and then, do you really want to taste it? And then it just goes into the opening credits, and it's just like, oh, this feels so weird. And like, I was tempted to hit skip. And I know my brother-in-law who was watching the show was like, yeah, I skipped it. Like, that was such a hard turn. I was like, yeah, but I think it was meant to be a hard turn, because it manipulates you in such a weird way. Like, it makes you feel uneasy, like you're supposed to. And I think that's one of the best examples of getting an audience to feel something, like, just through music. Like, it's such a knife turn there. Did you have that experience too?
Oh, yeah, I had that actually with the last two episodes. I don't remember how it transitions in the very last episode, but yeah, that cold open where he's remembering his brother. And I mean, the episode 6 ends on a really sour note. with him playing Motley Crue's Home Sweet Home, which is already a heavy song thematically, and just like seeing that's where they go with the episode 7 is a hard emotional turn where you're like, man, like this is such a heavy opening, and then you have the wigwam song kicks in. I'm just like, what just happened? But yeah, I agree. Like I think that that's actually been the selling point that I've sold a lot of people on the show. Like a lot of people were like kind of like where I was back when we did DC fandom, where they're like, I don't really need it. I was like, you have 2 minutes. Can I have 2 minutes of your time? And they're like, sure. So I pulled it up. Like I would just show them the opening sequence. And they're like, what the F is this? And I'm like, this is the opening theme song to Peacemaker. They're like, all right, I need to see this. And like they've all come back to me and just fallen in love with the show. And I think that it speaks ample quality to the way that music is woven into the show, not just to the theme song here, but into a lot of the majority of the episodes as well.
I mean, I think that's something James Gunn does really well, is incorporate music into his stories. Like you look at the Guardians films, like those are two of the best-selling soundtracks of all time, just because, and they're just playlists. Like it's not anything new. It's just playlists of songs from the 70s. And I think a lot of those songs have come back into pop culture because of James Gunn, because of his incorporation into those films. And I think he does the exact same thing here with incorporating all this different music. So yeah, I really trust James Gunn with his music taste in anything he does.
Did you have like a particular moment that you felt like the music was used just like really well within the course of this outside of the theme song?
Well, it's the theme song
I
again.
I have two.
Yeah.
So
right off the top of my head, it's when they use the theme song in the actual show in that final battle with the butterflies. They go in, guns loaded, and they start fighting these butterflies, and then they start losing, and then the music just slows down and gets really slow and low and stops. I think that was a great moment because it like shows you like where their mindset is. Like they're all like, yeah, gun ho, let's go kick some ass. And then slowly and like they start losing. And like, it was such a great way of showing that. Beyond that, the other moment was in the van when they're listening to I forget what the band was, but when Hardcore takes a
11th
picture.
Street Kids, yeah.
Yeah. Which is what they call their group chat for the cast. The 11th Street Kids.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah, those are actually my two favorite ones too. I think that the climactic. You had what?
I'm sorry, I sold both of them.
You're good, man. No, I that, and then the one that that I mentioned earlier, Home Sweet Home, Motley Crue was one of my favorite bands growing up. And Theater of Pain, I love that album. So like the fact that he also played that part himself and like learned how to play it, like makes me have immense more respect for Cena as a performer, but also at the same time, like it fit that moment right in the moment that it needed to. And I love specifically, like you talked in the van where Hardcore takes the sequence. And so it's not necessarily my favorite use of music to the 11th Street Kids, but it's the scene where it's Cameos, Vigilante, and Peacemaker, and they're all like going to do a mission. And he's like, dude, you have to listen to it so loud. And he's like, there's no wrong time to rock. And then after they fight the white dragon, Vigilante and Peacemaker get back in the car, and Peacemaker cranks it up, and he's like, do you need my dad just died, I need a minute. He's like, wrong, there's no wrong time to rock. And he just continues to crank it up. Like, it was such a great callback.
Yeah. What did you think of the father-son relationship between Peacemaker and his dad in this, because that's a big theme in this show.
God, man. So I did some research on the comics in preparation for wanting to kind of know a little bit more about this character, and not just James Gunn's take on him, but the fact that like he is largely kind of abandoned as a kid, if I remember correctly. And I think that they did that really good here, where the father was still present but emotionally absent. I think it was a good spin on that. And Robert Patrick, I mean, just is an incredible actor. And I always forget about how good of an actor he is. And I think that he just did a phenomenal job in here. But I think having their dichotomy and their versions of what peace meant was such a fascinating thing to undertake, where you have a guy that is kind of starting to adjust his definition of the word, but then you have this guy that is essentially a very predominant white supremacist. And I feel like it opened up a very timely conversation on race and kind of how, not just necessarily how white people kind of see other races, but also at the same time, kind of like specifically how lower class can sometimes see race.
Yeah, and I think another part of it, that the part that stuck out to me about the racism stuff, was not necessarily like the racism issue itself, but it's like Christopher Peacemaker coming to terms with the fact that his dad is a racist, and like that's not who he is. Like he doesn't like it's a journey of him stepping out of his father's shadow. Everything that he was raised with, everything he was taught, kind of stepping away from that and becoming his own person. And I think that was a really interesting journey that James Gunn wrote. And I think you could really see the progression in Cena's character throughout the whole show, of him coming to terms with who his father really is, what his upbringing was really like. And I think the death of his brother is like the main thing with that, because like the whole time, like it's a great catalyst for that, because the whole time his father's like, you killed your brother, this is all your fault, when everyone else who knows the story is like, that's not your fault, you were raised in that, like that your father is more responsible for that than you are, like that's a issue, a circumstance, not of your actions. And I think they kind of try to take away the guilt from that for him, but it's something that he's dealt with his whole life, so it's really hard to deal with. And I think the show does a really good job of dealing with that, exploring those themes.
I think it's interesting too, because with that character trait in particular is, I think that if you're raised around a certain environment, you kind of view that as normal. Like that's what you grow to know. Like if I was raised around, I don't know. I'm thinking of like drawing a blank example, but like if I grew up in a town, like a family similar to like Leatherface, like, and I thought that like, I was raised to think that killing was all right. And then you get out into the real world where people kind of think like the rest of the world has this collective thought that like murder is wrong. Then you're having to adjust to that. And I think for him, that was such an interesting character dynamic, but it also really proved that like a lot of sometimes our upbringings can be really toxic, not only for the way that we view other relationships, but also how it affects our mental health. Because, for so long, I think one of the heartbreaking things about this is like his dad clearly was just such a tool bag. And yet he always like went to bat for it. And like, wow, that dynamic produced one of the funniest sequences improvised in this. I think it's like 80 names in like 2-minute challenge.
Yeah.
but it's also one of the heaviest scenes in context because here you have a character that is quite literally blinded to his own toxicity that he's lived with because it's been normal for him.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Um, no, that 80 names in 2 minutes thing was my favorite scene of the whole show. As soon as he started going off on the late night show host, so I was like, this is great. Like, I love a good Conan O'Brien joke. And like, it was such a timely Conan joke too, because like Conan just ended his show and he's like, Conan O'Brien, he's not doing much these days. And like, he has like an HBO Max contract too. So I was like, that's such a layered joke. And I love it.
I think, yeah, I love that too. But before we move off it, I think one of the things that's really that I think that they did really well was the fact that bringing in Waller's daughter, Lita, who's played by Danielle Brooks. I think she does a fantastic job in this. She's one of my favorites, and I think she brings a lot of depth to the character. But here you have the son of not only a racist but a notorious white supremacist supervillain, and he kind of really starts to change the way that his upbringing taught him to. And I think that their dynamic and their relationship was so beautiful to see throughout the course of it, because you really got to kind of see kind of almost his redemption be brought through that.
And it's such a great dynamic between the two characters, because like it starts like they both don't trust each other at the beginning, but you see this friendship form throughout the show. And by the end of it, he's like, don't tell V, but after Eagly, you're my best friend. It's such a great journey to go on with these two characters. And I think the chemistry between those two was great too.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I love the fact too that like they were able to tie more into the Suicide Squad than just like a name alone. The fact that like the show is literally bookended by Viola Davis coming back for bookended things, and it's also a legacy, the daughter of a legacy character woven into the show to be the main thing. And I love the dichotomy that you have between her mother and daughter, where it's kind of almost like a reflection of Peacemaker, father and son, where like here you have guys that stand literally on two complete opposite, where one believes that one race is supreme, and then here you have another guy that's like trying to really cope with what it means to be a human. And you also have the two ideas between the two Wallers, where one of them, is going to go to the extreme ends of the earth to, kind of protect secrets at all costs. And you have someone that works as a veterinarian, like works at an animal hospital. And so it's a beautiful dichotomy that they create.
And the other thing about the Adebayo storyline that I liked was she's working with Harcourt and Economos, who have worked under Waller, her mother, for years and don't trust Waller at all. Like, so they're bad mouthing her left and right. So she gets to see another side of her mother through these other people's eyes. And I don't think that's something that she was aware of beforehand. So it's just interesting to see how she adapts to this world that her mother has been in for so long that she's been unaware of, and like what other people see her mother as. Which I think I'm interested to see where the show goes with that, because I think the ending of the finale kind of sets up like more of a mother-daughter dynamic going forward in season 2.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that like the DC, now that the news has been spilled about Task Force X, like that's also another thing that completely uproots and changes the dynamic of the DCEU.
Until the Flash goes back in time to save his mom and screws everything up. Thanks, Barry.
If damn it, Barry, you had one job. I mean, as long as like if what we're hearing is true that this does take place after the events of the Flash, which I feel like I have to see the Flash and watch the Peacemaker again back to back to see if I can agree with that or not. But
Yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting.
How are we doing on time?
We're good. We're good.
Okay. We haven't really talked much about the MacGuffin of the show, which is the butterflies.
Only James Gunn could create something like this.
I mean, it fits DC stuff. I mean, it's not a beam of light being shot into the sky, which is a nice change of pace for DC. But it's also kind of the same thing that they did in the Suicide Squad. Like, you already used Starro, so I guess we can't do Starro again. So let's do butterflies that have a giant cow.
Yeah, it kind of really did feel like and that would probably be my biggest complaint about the show was the antagonistic element, is because, like, I mean, again, but I think you run into that problem of Peacemaker is such an unknown character. Who do you have face off against him? Who do you make the big threat? And it just kind of feels perfect that you would have it be an alien invasion. And with that alien invasion, I think you also cover your tracks really well with, Anabio was only there to plant the diary and kind of be the mole or the lookout for her mom. And, they kind of set him up to take the fall initially.
Yeah.
And I liked that dynamic and that backboard, but I think you're right. Like, the whole butterfly, just the butterfly aspect of this show is definitely the weakest point, because it feels like a repeat of Starro, just with slightly different altercations.
Yeah. And it does do, like, the biggest thing it does is like that the scene where Peacemaker is supposed to kill the senator's family because they're butterflies. He question, that's where he starts to kind of be like, I don't want to kill kids, and he tries to find an excuse out of it. That's the first time when he's like, I don't know if this is right or not. And I think the not knowing who's a butterfly and who's not was an interesting dynamic for the show, especially for that character to justify the means in which he gets peace. And so I think that was a really strong moment that came from the butterflies. But beyond that, they just felt like villain filler.
Yeah, again, I think it goes back to the obscurity of this character from the comics. Who do you have face off against him? Like, if you didn't have the butterflies, who do you put in place of it? Like, I would have been completely okay with Kite Man being a main villain, and I know that he's kind of gotten popularity more recently because of Harley Quinn, the animated series, but also at the same time, Tom King has also used him in his run of the Batman. And so he's kind of become a little bit more recognizable as a villain. And I also don't know if there's enough with him as a villain to carry on a big bad 8-episode order. So that's another thing too, is that you have to get around the obscurity, but you also have to create a character that's going to be enough that is essentially going to be able to fill out 8 episodes and just not feel one note.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see who they bring in for season 2, because I feel like you need to bring in an actual villain for season 2, and unless it's just going to be Waller, which would be interesting.
I don't think that I think the way that they've positioned Amanda Waller in the DCEU so far, that I just couldn't picture them necessarily doing that.
Yeah. I'm trying to think what else I wanted to talk about.
Well, I mean, if I can go on with the
Yeah.
butterflies real quick,
Yeah.
also too is like I'm kind of glad that it's my only complaint because like the butterflies definitely feel like background noise to the larger everything else that's going on. I think that because you had those filler villains, you're able to allow characters like Daniel Brooks's character, John Cena's character, Freddie Stroma's character, even Economos towards the end, like with the Diebeer monologue. I think that you give so much of these this ragtag group of characters, you give them depth, and I think that you're able to flesh out a large portion of Christopher Smith because and the White Dragon and all of kind of like the white supremacist stuff because you have such a generic villain. You're able to flesh out so much more of this world, and I'm kind of almost grateful for it in that fact.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. It definitely gives like Steve Agee, like I've only ever seen him do comedy stuff, and that monologue that he gets at the end was really good. Like it was a very solid performance, and it felt like I really felt for the character in that moment. And I think it did exactly what it was supposed to do to get Peacemaker to realize the error of his ways with the way he treats people too. Like even when he's joking, like it gets him to realize that people like might take what he says to heart.
Yeah, I think that like again, like Steve Agee does a lot of like mostly comedy work. Because I also too have only ever seen him do comedic stuff, and it's fine, like absolutely 100% fine. But like getting to see him kind of step out and uh, show his um chops as a dramatic actor is also really fascinating. I think you're right. Like he absolutely nails that particular monologue that we're referring to in episode 8. But also at the same time, I think that it gives his character a lot more needed depth, but also at the same time, you also kind of get to see the fact that, you know, Peacemaker is, uh, again, I think it kind of goes back to you see how much of a damaged upbringing he had and kind of how that upbringing and thinking of supremacy really messed with him to where he's kind of like come around a lot. And I'm surprised we've made it almost an hour into this podcast and we have not talked about the fact that John Cena literally sang into a vibrator. First episode.
I
Forget about that.
I thought you were saying
tighties.
we made it an hour without talking about Eagly.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Oh yeah, we haven't talked about the Eagly either, which I love Eagly, man. Like I think we talked about this when we did DC Fandom, but that was one of I think both our favorite shots of that trailer.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love the use of Eagly in this. I think that it was just so great. Nailed it.
What surprised me most about Eagly was that moment from the trailer where he gets the hug from Eagly is like one of the milestones of the series for Adebayo. Like she sees that happen later on in the show after saying, I don't believe that happened for a second. And then she sees it. She's like, I need to help this guy. Like, I belong here. Like, it was such a turning point for her character. And like, that came from the shot from the trailer that we were laughing at. Like, it just amazed me that came full circle by the end of the show.
I love the fact that it came full circle, and I think that, you know, we've talked about this before on Victims, is that, like, you know, when we meet Cena in the beginning, like, I mean, he's a tool bag, you know. I think that the way that Gunn described him in the DC fandom 2 years ago was that, like, think Captain America, but a douchebag. And I think you get that. And I think that's kind of where he was in the Suicide Squad, but I also think that's where he is when we meet him in the beginning of the series, is, you know, being free from, you know, he thinks very high of himself. He's very lofty. And I think that the only kind of person that really kind of accepts him for who he is, and I think is a big help towards his own mental health, is a pet, is his, you know, sidekick Eagly. Yeah. And that speaks volumes to the type of you know, care a pet can do for your mental health.
Yeah. I don't have a pet, so I can't really speak on that. I will say my favorite Eagly moment in every episode is at the end of the opening credits, where he adjusts just like a half inch to the right, like every time. Like he misses his mark by that much and just does a little shuffle. Like, I absolutely love that every time it happened.
In the opening credits?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I missed that.
Yeah, it's very subtle, but somebody pointed it out to me, and I was like, I can't not see it now. So you go back and watch the opening credits and watch Eagly at the very last shot where they're all frozen, and you just watch Eagly. He adjusts just a little bit he even looks down and like adjusts to his mark.
It's amazing. Okay, I'll go back and watch after we get done. But I want to ask you a question. Did you think that Judo Kid was related to the detachable kid from the Suicide Squad? That was the Nathan Fillion character.
I didn't think about that, but they have very similar costumes, don't they?
Yeah, that's the only reason why I asked that, is I absolutely loved his character. And I love the fact that he's a scrawny kid that his whole thing is just beating up people and eating Flamin' Hot Cheetos.
Yeah. I didn't think of that. But I do know from interviews that James Gunn has done that the detachable kid survived the Suicide Squad.
Comes back, you know, in part.
Yeah.
Season 2.
I mean, James Gunn and Nathan Fillion have worked together for years, like going back to Slither. So it wouldn't surprise me if they brought him in for season 2. If The Rookie gets canceled on ABC, I guarantee that's going to happen. Even if it doesn't.
Crossed. Like, even if it's for an episode, you know, like, hey, yeah, dude, I would be all for that. And I think one of my favorite scenes between the detachable kid, the judo master, and this episode, I think it's 4, is when they're underground and Judo Master captures them, and he's just kind of waiting for the like his boss to come down and kind of like start the torturing. Just seeing his flaming bag of Cheetos, and he's like, "Oh, you eating Cheetos?" And he's like, "Yeah." And so he just starts like flicking them at him and like doing like weird judo kicks to get him into his mouth, and his John Cena's reaction is, "Ow! All right, you know, what do they put in Cheetos?"
So we also haven't talked about the cameos at the end of the finale.
I feel like that's like an end of conversation kind of thing, but I agree.
Do we have anything else to talk about? Because we're kind of at the bottom of my list of things.
I think for me, I think we've talked about it a little bit, but I think this this film or this series touches a lot on the thematics of, generational uh generational I don't even know how to say it. Like, it's not necessarily depression, but trauma.
Yeah.
And kind of the what it plays on. And I think that for the first time, you're not just kind of seeing this character from the Suicide Squad is Captain America, a tool bag version of Captain America, but you're getting to see kind of why he is the way that he is. And, um, you know, seeing, kind of going through some of the things with the White Dragon and the fact that, he was in prison and he's, wanting to be a superhero, but people don't see him as that. And, he's always trying to prove himself, whether it's to, the city around him, to his neighbors, to his friends, his father. But also, he carries so much of the hurt from his brother's death because he's believed it's been his fault for all these years. And I think that speaks volumes to the kind of damage that, other people can place on our own mental health. And it's honestly like what we need to do is kind of step back and realize that, like, analyze it through our own eyes and not necessarily the eyes of other people.
Yeah, I think nature and nurture comes into it a bit. Like, nurture can be a bigger part than nature sometimes. Like, the influence of your family can really have an effect on you that you might not see until you're outside of that dynamic. And I think the show does a really good job of exploring that and exploring what it takes to be your own person. So yeah.
And I think even from like a personal standpoint, when I got into doing, film critiques and criticism, I always kind of I would listen to Jeremy Johns from YouTube. I grew up on Roger and Ebert and Siegel and Ebert, and people like that like they really dictated the way that I saw whether or not a movie had value or worth or not. And I think that sometimes we do the same thing when it comes to other people and their voices. And I think Peacemaker is a terrific example of that because, he bases his value and his worth on solely what other people say about him.
Yeah. And like, he's such a, and with that, like, John Cena brings such a charismatic personality to the character that it's very easy to identify with him, even if you're not from the same upbringing as he is. But he seems like at the end of the day, he just wants to do the right thing, I think.
Yeah.
And I think he doesn't know the best way of going about that. And I think it's just his journey on getting to that point and figuring out what to do.
I think also too is that, like, he, because of his upbringing and because of what he's necessarily been taught from this generational trauma standpoint, is that he doesn't necessarily even look at the way he looks at, like, a very skewed, very limited way of what it means to get the job done. And I think that go ahead.
It's almost childlike. Like, he reverts back to a child. Like, I have the picture, like, I'm just going through pictures on IMDb from the show, and it's like the one of Eagly giving him a hug in the vet clinic, and he's like got his phone out. He's like all happy, like, look at this, like, this is awesome. Like, it's such a pure moment of joy that it's childlike. Like, he runs the gambit of assassin, killer, but also like, my pet eagle's hugging me. Like, this is awesome. Like, look at this. And I think that goes back to the trauma. Like, he reverts back to playing with his brother before the accident. Like, I think that is also a big part of his personality because of that trauma.
That trauma has shaped him. You're absolutely right. And I think one of the things that's a huge turning point for his character in there is where he gets cold feet right before he's basically told to assassinate this family, but doesn't have any context for the butterflies or their alien invasion. And the fact that he won't do it is, I think, speaks volumes to kind of his own development of not necessarily thinking, not necessarily agreeing with other people because they tell him to, but you're getting to see who Christopher Smith is as a character.
Yeah.
Now we can get into the cameos.
Okay. So yeah, I was not expecting the Justice League to actually show up here. Were you?
No. So I have actually, so with episodes 4 through 8, I actually got up early to watch the episodes before work. So I didn't have to find time in my schedule for one, and for two, when spoilers came, I was ahead of the game. And that shocked me. And the fact that it was reading about it, the fact that like they pitched it to Jason Momoa before the series even shot. He was like, "Yeah, 100%, I'll be there."
Yeah. So when we saw the silhouettes, like, oh, that's cool. They're gonna do silhouettes, but then they cuts in on Jason Momoa. I was like, wait, they got Jason Momoa for this? And then Ezra Miller was like, they got Ezra Miller for this just for like a one-line joke. I was like, that is phenomenal. Have you read anything about the behind the scenes of this?
I have, and before we get into it, I really have to say that, like, let me remind you that Ezra Miller was on the CW Flash.
Yeah.
So I don't really think it's like that big of a stretch to get him to come back to do this show, because I think that at the end of the day, he's just passionate about this character.
I think he is too, but I was just surprised that for the joke that they tell, that the higher ups at DC was like, yeah, you guys can go do that. Like, there are two things about the behind the scenes of this, which is, one, we were supposed to get the full Justice League, but something happened between shooting it and
that I did not know.
Yeah, they had body doubles for Cyborg and Batman as well, but Warner Brothers, DC somewhere along the line said don't put them in there. So that kind of lends credence to the fact that it might take place after the Flash. So, like, if it was gonna be Affleck's Batman. So
my one problem with that is that they've also shoehorned out Cavill's Superman. So why even show the silhouette of him? Because you're only mostly focusing on the current continuity.
They haven't said anything about Cavill's Superman. Officially, they've never said that he's done. And a lot of people are taking this as a sign of, okay, maybe we will get more of him down the line.
Now I'm curious because I'm like almost 90% sure that like his contract was up and they had no desire
he's open to it. Like, he's definitely open to playing the character again. I would love to see him play the character again. Ben Affleck's out completely. Rafe Fisher, who played Cyborg, he's never going to work with Warner Brothers again. So it makes sense that they didn't put him in there, because they're going to have to like write out that character.
So this actually comes from the direct. This article says Henry Cavill gets candid about future Superman hopes, and it says currently Cavill is not signed on to play any Superman in any DCEU projects, although he's expressed a desire to return to the role on multiple occasions.
Yeah.
Whether he gets the opportunity to is still in the air, but with each year that passes, the chances seem to be dwindling down in terms of a comeback happening.
Yeah.
And that's not to mention that he signed on for like a 7-season deal for The Witcher to Netflix.
Well, at the same time, though, like, Kevin Feige's been very open about there being another Spider-Man trilogy in the MCU, but Tom Holland's only signed on for one more team-up film. So
But we've
the
seen them
possibility of
work
it
their.
happening.
That's true, but Marvel also, the dotted line ended and expired for Robert Downey Jr. and they're like, "Here's more money, come back,"
Yeah.
and he did it.
I mean, who knows what's going to happen with Superman? We might just see a different version of Superman that's not Henry Cavill, because they don't show
That's
his
true.
face.
And it is interesting to note that like they were supposed to have Cyborg and what is the other one? Batman, and that they did it because I mean, out of all of the DC mess that has happened in the last few years, Ray Fisher has kind of gotten the short end of the stick on just about everything.
Yeah. And I don't think they were ever going to ask him to be the cameo in this, unless James Gunn had a part for him. And I think he probably would do it for someone like James Gunn, but I get the feeling that the higher ups like, yeah, let's not put Cyborg in this because we're not going to be using that character going forward. Which is a shame because I think Zack Snyder's Justice League really did that character justice. The other thing behind the scenes of the cameos is I believe Jason Momoa was shot on set, so he was there during production of Peacemaker. Ezra Miller was not. Ezra Miller actually filmed his with the crew for Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. He came to Atlanta to film it. The Marvel crew filmed that cameo and sent it over to DC. Just like the DC crew on Peacemaker filmed the
Something
screen
with
test.
Guardians.
Yeah, it was a screen test for the actor who played what's his name?
Is it Murr?
Murr. He played Murn on Peacemaker. He did his screen test during Peacemaker for Guardians 3. So the DC crew filmed something to send over to Marvel. So that was kind of them returning the favor. So it's nice to know that James Gunn is kind of building a bridge between the two universes. So maybe someday we'll see a Peacemaker versus Deadpool episode or
movie. Please make that happen. I would love to see that happen, man. I think I think I was really surprised genuinely by that. Probably one of my favorite moments in this series though towards the end was definitely kind of like the after effects after everything's happened, but like I mentioned it earlier, Vigilante and Peacemaker blowing up that car, just kind of the pure joy and excitement and just pure moment that was it was great.
That's actually an official still on IMDb for the show.
That's amazing. I think it was in the trailer too, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, they actually also have the official shots of Aquaman and Flash in this as well. So
great spoilers there.
Yeah. I mean, we're living in a world where spoilers happen eventually. Like the major spoil, like Marvel's finally revealing the spoilers for Spider-Man No Way Home to announce the Blu-ray release. So
yeah.
But if you haven't seen it, I'm not going to spoil that here because I still feel weird talking about it.
Yeah, same. But I guess our last question we can ask is, man, like, what are you hoping for season 2?
Now that you pointed out the Judo Master costume looking like the detachable kid, I kind of want Nathan Fillion in season 2. Like I think that's the reason James Gunn has said that character survived the Suicide Squad. So I would love to see him come into this as a antagonist. I'd also maybe like to see maybe another DC hero come in that they have to work with. It's not like have Peacemaker and Vigilante have to team up with somebody like Green Arrow or somebody DC's not going to be using super quickly. But I would also like cast wise, I would love to see like somebody like Dave Bautista come in here and join the cast.
Yes.
Because once he's done with Marvel, once he's done with Guardians 3, I think he's done with Marvel too. So come on over to the DC side of things. And I think him and he was the biggest supporter of James Gunn back in the dark times where he wasn't working for Marvel or DC. So I think there's
Yeah,
a lot of connection there.
I think for him, once he gets done with Guardians, he goes right into Dune, because I believe his part in Dune Part 2 is going to be a lot greater.
Yeah, that would make sense.
But to your point, yeah, I would love to see someone like Green Arrow or like a B or C list superhero kind of come in, and that's who they have to team up with. I think it would be a great callback. And I would love to see what, because I mean, if you've ever read a Green Arrow comic, you know that Green Arrow and Arrow are two completely different things. The same way that Vigilante and Vigilante are in completely different things in the comics versus Peacemaker. I would love to kind of get to see that lightheartedness. I don't know necessarily if I would want to see Nathan Fillion as the antagonist, just because I couldn't separate him from his Dr. Horrible sing-along character, which is a truly unsung hero. Great.
Well, it's an unsung singing hero.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. He was so good in that movie. But yeah, I don't know, man. I have high hopes for season 2. My biggest thing is like I don't necessarily care what they do with these characters as long as Gunn comes back.
Yeah.
Gunn coming back for 8 episodes, I feel like is the only way I'm going to have faith in a second season.
And I don't think like he didn't direct every episode, and I don't think he's going to direct every episode for season 2.
Yeah.
He might not write every episode of season 2, maybe because he's not in COVID lockdowns. They'll have a writer's room. So it'll probably change the dynamic of the show. But at the same time, James Gunn's a writer. So I wouldn't be surprised if he sat down and wrote the next 8 episodes or 10 episodes on his own. So I'm interested to see what happens.
I mean, who's to say that like he doesn't have all the second season already done as far as writing goes?
I mean, he probably has an outline. I don't know if he has the script stuff.
Yeah.
He's a little bit busy playing with Groot and Rocket right now in Atlanta. So, and getting engaged. Congrats to James Gunn and Jennifer Holland, who just got engaged over the weekend.
Yep. Well, all right, let's go ahead and get into this. This episode is brought to you by our Horrific Hope sponsors, including Alan's podcast. You have to watch this podcast along with Ride the Omnibus podcast and Fierce Literature. Thank you guys. If you guys would like to become a sponsor and find out more information about our podcast, about our first ever film festival that is horror centric, mental health focused, go to victimsandvillains.net/horrific hope. And all of those links are going to be in the show notes below. Alan, where can people find your podcast online?
People can find You Have to Watch This podcast on all major podcasting platforms. We also just joined up with the Rum Runners podcast network, so you can find our new website at rumrunnerspodcastnetwork.com/You Have to Watch This pod. I'll send Josh the link to put in the description as well. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And Twitch.
You're on Twitter now.
Twitch. We've had Twitter. I never used Twitter.
Bro, I was so surprised that you had Twitter.
Oh, yeah.
But you guys, where can people find you online?
People can find me on Instagram and Letterboxd. I think I'm ACRAMM4815 on both. Beyond that's pretty much all I have. And on Victims and Villains. I'm here.
He's one half of the Marvel guys.
Yeah, I'm one half of the Marvel correspondents along with Josh, the other Josh. And we've got some things planned before Morbius comes out. So hopefully we'll be doing an episode next week. So
you guys can find me. I'm at Captain Nostalgia, and you guys can find more information about Victims and Villains. Go to victimsandvillains.net, where you guys can find more episodes, the aforementioned film festival, along with all of our links to our socials. It's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Twitch, YouTube, wherever you guys get your podcasts from. Patreon, more podcasts like this one. movie reviews, and most importantly, our mental health resource library. Until next time, remember to pet an eagle and hug one if you see it.